So in this video, I'll be discussing the Final Fantasy VII Remake. This and The Last of Us 2 were my two favorite games of 2020, and if I had to choose which game was Game of the Year, I would have given it to the remake. What I discuss in this video is just my opinion, and other people who played the game might have seen something completely different, and that's okay. I think that's what makes the game so good. And with that, I'll get started. So I was pretty hyped for the Final Fantasy VII Remake. I had only played the original a little bit on the first PlayStation, way back when I was a kid, but I didn't get very far. My first real Final Fantasy experience came with Final Fantasy X, and what can I say? I absolutely love that game. I think it's the GOAT, greatest of all time. It literally had me crying for like 2 months straight, and no other game has ever done that. So since then, I've always considered Final Fantasy one of my top franchises. But outside of Final Fantasy X, I think 7 is probably considered the other big one. It's probably the most iconic one, even over Final Fantasy X. So when the remake was finally revealed at E3 2015, I was definitely ecstatic about it. It was my chance to finally find out what Final Fantasy VII was really all about. So then the day finally came, April 10th, 2020. And right away, my first impressions were that it looked amazing. The graphics were up there with the very best of the PS4 generation and probably above it, to be honest. I had played the demo a few weeks back, but still, it looked fantastic. I was totally blown away. The gameplay took a little getting used to, but it was pretty good. And then after you blow up the reactor, you go back to the bar, and that's when I first saw Tifa, and I was pretty much immediately in love. And that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing. If you get involved with the characters, then you're going to be involved with the story. And really, no other female character, had ever done this to me since Yuna from Final Fantasy X. And let me tell you, playing the original on PS1 doesn't do it justice. Graphics have come a long way since then. And that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about. I think the developers deserve so much credit for bringing these characters to life with these modern graphics. I don't think it was that easy, considering all they had to work with were those, pixel characters from the PS1 era. Well, okay, maybe that ain't totally true. There was also that Advent Children movie, which I never saw. And there's probably been other modern drawings of them, that have been made throughout the years. But nevertheless, I think the developers did an amazing job because I think all the characters are just spot on. They really serve to give you, that vibe that was intended with the original. Anyway, moving on. As I kept playing the game, I was well aware that the story was going to be divided into at least 3 parts. That there was going to be, 2 more installments of this remake. So this wasn't going to be the full story regardless. And I was curious to see, where they were going to end it and how. For a bit, I thought it was going to end after you blow up the second reactor. The part where Jesse dies, I think. It's been a long time since I played it, so I don't remember the exact sequences, but I know there's a time after Jesse dies that it feels kind of dramatic, like something's coming to a close. But actually, it still ends up having a good 15 hours after that, or maybe more. But from that point on, I started taking it a bit slower. I was feeling like I had kind of been rushing through it, just eager to learn the story. And I didn't think there was that much left, so I started taking it a little more chill. I wanted to, sort of soak in and enjoy what was left, because who knew how long, it'd be before we got the next installment. But eventually I finished it, and my first reaction was that I was a bit disappointed. I felt like the story hadn't really given me what I wanted, and I was just kind of confused about what had really happened at the end. But as time wore on, it started to sink in a little. I eventually came to realize that what we saw at the ending, didn't happen in the original. that they had sort of acknowledged the original timeline and sort of like broken out of it. Eris especially was acting kind of strange at the end, like she knew more than she was letting on. I don't know. I still don't. I don't understand fully what happened. I'm not sure if anyone does. But I think what it means is that they were able to change history. Well, they broke out of the timeline of the original, so now going forward, we don't know for sure what's going to happen. Events might not play out the same way, as they did in the original. That means even people who completed the original don't know what's going to happen. And then it started hitting me just how amazing that was. That this wasn't just a remake. It wasn't just a retelling. It was actually more kind of like a sequel in some ways. And to me, that changes everything. And even though I hadn't, got too far in the original, I was aware that Eris dies in the original. I mean, I think that's just common knowledge among longtime gamers. So in this one, Eris might not necessarily die. I think that's what it's telling us. And I know this was really a really controversial decision. It pissed off a lot of traditionalists. Even splitting the game up into 3 installments was very controversial. If you ask most people, they probably would have just preferred a straight up remake like Resident Evil 2, for example. But me personally, I strongly disagree with this. In my opinion, this gives the game and these characters real life in 2020 and beyond. We're not just playing a tribute game anymore. We're playing something that's actually happening now. So while I was initially disappointed with it, I ended up being really excited for what's to come. But why was I disappointed to begin with? Not because it was a bad game. I think the game does an amazing job of introducing us to this world and these characters. But the problem is that that's about all it does. It's not the complete story, and even though they tried their best to make it feel like a complete game, it's clearly not, and you can feel it. And that's really the only negative thing that I can say about it. So if I was going to review it just based on what's there, I would give it about an 8.5 out of 10. That's lower than I gave The Last of Us 2. And yet I would still consider the Final Fantasy VII Remake as my 2020 Game of the Year. And that's because, in my opinion, it leaves the series in a much stronger position than The Last of Us 2 did. I'm super excited for what's to come in the second installment of this remake. In fact, it's become my most anticipated game. It's replaced The Last of Us as my #1 franchise now. But what exactly made it so interesting? Well, it's different for everyone. Cloud is an interesting character. He's got mental issues because of his time as a soldier or whatever. But by far, what makes it so interesting, in my opinion, is the rivalry between Tifa and Aerith. Even though they don't see themselves as rivals in the game or anything, they're two of the most iconic, if not the two most iconic female characters of the whole series. They're both so well written and such amazing characters, and yet they're so different and contrasting of each other. They each complement Cloud in a different way. So it's really no surprise that a lot of people can't help but be either Team Tifa or Team Aerith. And I'm not necessarily talking about, who would be best to ship with Cloud or anything. I'm talking about, who's considered the true female protagonist of the game. It's something that fans of the series have been debating for decades, and it's probably still going on today, especially thanks to this remake. In fact, I find this topic so interesting that I think I'll probably make a video specifically about this. So yeah, going forward, nobody knows what's going to happen. Of course, everyone knows Aerith dies in the original. But what if she doesn't die this time? How does that change things? Also, if you played the Yuffie episode, at the end we see that Zack is apparently alive in this timeline. Remember, Zack is Aerith's first love. So that's what they say in this game. So how will that change things? There's so many questions and different things that can happen, and I mean, it's obvious why it's my number one game going forward.